The topic of this podcast is not going to be like my past ones or future ones. I don't usually like to talk in depth about killers because, frankly, I feel they already get too much attention. So instead of talking about the missing, because of the few people I've been fortunate enough to speak with, we're going to talk today about one of the people who was responsible for making someone go missing, and possibly several others, and expand from there a bit. Some of the information I found out in my research isn't widely known and might surprise you. Let's talk about Mark Riebe. Mark Riebe seemingly had a normal upbringing from a fairly large family. He was raised by parents who loved him, as well as two sisters and a brother in Florida. After high school, he had a brief stint in the Army and then returned to Florida, where he proceeded to have 4 marriages and 5 biological and stepchildren. He was never really on the radar of the police until his half-brother Alex Wells, while serving a lengthy prison term in the 90s on convictions for attempted abduction and convenience store robbery, confessed in a prison Bible study group that he had participated in killing a woman. Some inmates overheard the confession and alerted the authorities. Police would hear a chilling story, and after Alex was finished, Mark Riebe would be someone who turned out to be the worst kind of human being, the kind who kills. According to Alex, the brothers went to a convenience store in Gulf Breeze on August 16, 1989, with the intent to rob it. The clerk's purse was still on the counter, and it is believed that no money was even taken, but unfortunately cashier Donna Callahan was. In the early months of her second pregnancy, she begged for her life and the life of her unborn child, but her pleas were ignored and she was ultimately strangled in the back seat of the brother's car. Each brother still insists the other did the actual killing, but what is known is that her body was placed in the trunk and not long after buried in a wooded area directly next to the brothers' family's property in Defuniak Springs, Florida. Alex led them to the remains years later, and they both pled no contest to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. I will take this time to talk about one of the 2 people whom I spoke with to make this podcast as detailed and accurate as it can be. Dennis Haley, retired FDLE agent, has been on the case investigating and talking with Mark Riebe for over 25 years and knows more about him and his crimes than anyone. He was kind enough to speak with me at length for my article in 2019 and to touch base again recently in preparation for this podcast, and I appreciate his help so much. In the months after Mark Riebe began his 25 years to life prison sentence, he apparently began to confess to other murders to his mother and sister. He told them that they needed to get a hold of Dennis Haley and get him down here because it will be mind-boggling what I'm about to tell him. His family did as he requested, so Special Agent Haley made the 7-hour drive to Union Correctional Institution to talk to him. What he was about to say was incredible, to say the least. He tells Dennis Haley, "I killed a lot of girls. I'm a serial killer." Mark Riebe then proceeds to confess to a shocking 12 more murders. A few months later, and after being taken out numerous times to show police where the crimes took place, Mark Riebe then recants all of the confessions. He claims he confessed to help his young son out of a dangerous situation he was in at the time, then claiming his deal was reneged on by Haley, he took back the confessions. This is something Dennis Haley denies, of course. Some of the murders Riebe confessed to, Special Agent Haley doesn't really believe. He would mention murdering a female in a specific town, but the details he gave them were extremely vague or didn't match up with any disappearances or murders he could find. A few were even similar to murders that Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas confessed to, and it was discovered that Mark Riebe and Otis Toole did do time at the same jail in the past. Special Agent Haley does, however, believe that Mark Riebe committed at least 7 murders in addition to Callahan's. He does believe that his half-brother Alex Wells was complicit in 2 of them, although to what extent Wells was thought to be involved is unknown. In 4 of these confessions, Haley believes they are legitimate because of the very detailed things Riebe told him that only the killer would know. A few others he believes he committed for other reasons, but we will go through the list and explain what is known about each case and what Mark Riebe told investigators during his confession. Bonnie Gail Reither is thought to be Mark Riebe's first victim. She was a 27-year-old cocktail waitress, and he was only 17 when her murder occurred on April 5, 1978. In his confession, he said they met in Wayside Park and were smoking dope, and he got angry and killed her in her car. He said he partially buried her body and left it and her car in a park, but couldn't remember exactly which one. He also made a point during the confession to mention he liked to drink Busch Tallboy beers. Incidentally, Bonnie's Ford Pinto had been found abandoned in Ferry Park, Fort Walton Beach. Her battered body would be found 6 days later, partially buried, with the few cans of Busch Tallboy beers scattered around her remains. On a side note, Mark Riebe also mentioned drinking Busch Tallboys during his confession to Pamela June Ray's murder. Next, we'll talk about the murder of Jackie Brandt. She was an 18-year-old who had traveled to Panama City Beach for spring break and wasn't officially reported missing. Her parents did call police to check on her around April of 1986 when she is thought to have disappeared. When her remains were found on November 30th, 1986, they had been skeletonized and there was no way to tell her cause of death, and due to that, it was not even classified as a homicide. Then, years later, Mark Riebe confessed that he had murdered her. He said he met her at a bar called The Playground that she frequented. They left together and he got angry and strangled her in her car. He was able to accurately describe her clothing and took police to where he remembered burying her, which did end up being about 10 feet from where her remains had actually been found years earlier. The next confession would be to the horrific assault of 35-year-old Lindsay Sams. She was a doctor's wife, and her family were vacationing at the Seaward Condo Complex in Miramar Beach, Florida. Mark Riebe said he was at a convenience store across the street and happened to see a Jaguar parked out front. He even remembered the vanity plates on it. He said he was going to be a cat burglar and do a robbery. He had entered the condo and was crawling around on her bedroom floor. When Lindsay Sams got up in the night to get a drink, as was her habit, she encountered Riebe. He proceeds to beat her in the head with a pry bar during the vicious assault and flees the scene, and hours later her daughter is horrified to find her mother bloody and unconscious. She is lifelined in very critical condition due to her savage beating. She lingers, dying 11 months later due to her injuries. Riebe was able to accurately describe to police the jewelry he took, the precise layout of the 3-story condo, and even the railing that was pulled off the wall during the assault. The next murder Special Agent Haley believes Mark Riebe is responsible for is Rhonda Taylor. Mark said that he and Rhonda were looking for some crack cocaine to purchase. He said that a black male that sold it to them ended up coming with them. They had exited her car, and after doing the drugs, Rhonda got extremely hot and removed her clothing and proceeded to get into a heated argument where Riebe said he stabbed her repeatedly. The unknown male with them tried to step in, and Riebe stabbed him in the hand as well. Afterwards, Mark put Rhonda's body back in the back seat of her silver Buick and parked it at Gulf Convalescent Center in Fort Walton Beach, where it is believed his wife Vicky was working that night. Rhonda was found undressed and her clothing found in the car with no blood on it and no cuts from the stab wounds, backing up Riebe's story. Also noteworthy, years later, the only DNA found in the car was from a bloody towel, and it was eventually tested and did belong to a black male that police were not even aware of was at the scene. Not until Mark Riebe's confession, that is. The next 2 disappearances that Special Agent Haley believes Mark Riebe could have been involved with, he did not confess to. During his confession interview with police, he makes a point to say he was not responsible for the disappearance of Andrea Durham. Police never even mentioned the case to Riebe at all, so the fact that he brought it up and his claim to not be involved are very curious. She was 13 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her mother and sister had left her home at their residence at the Royal Apartments in Fort Walton Beach while they attended a meeting. When they returned 2 hours later, the vacuum was sitting out as Andrea was to clean while they were gone, but Andrea was missing. Her purse and belongings were all still in the apartment with no signs of a struggle. There was a connection to Mark Riebe, though, as his stepdaughter and stepson were friends with Andrea, and she had been to their house many times before, according to one of Riebe's daughters. Andrea Durham remains missing to this day. The second one is the disappearance of Deborah Poe. She went missing on February 4th, 1990, just 4 days after Andrea Durham. Her disappearance was much like Donna Callahan's in that she was apparently abducted while working the overnight shift at a convenience store in Orlando. Special Agent Haley told me that Mark and his brother Alex were together the weekend Deborah Poe was abducted, and they had an aunt that lived in the area. There were reports by several people of an unknown man in the convenience store after Deborah Poe went missing who was standing behind the counter. One of the witnesses who interacted with the unknown man picked Alex Wells out of a lineup as the man she had seen in the store that night. Deborah Poe, to this day, has never been found. I do want to add a few more details in regard to Pamela June Ray, which we covered in the last podcast. While confessing, Mark Riebe did take them to the Wilhite Motel, which is the location where Pamela June Ray was abducted from. I also want to talk about a conversation that Alex told to police after the fact relating to this particular disappearance. Special Agent Haley said when it was known that police were talking to Alex Wells about the Donna Callahan disappearance, Mark Riebe had spent some considerable time that day out by his family's property and then visited his brother in prison. He assured Alex that police would never find Donna Callahan's body. But remember, Alex would eventually voluntarily lead them to her remains. And Mark told Alex, and I had to move the other lady. Alex was in prison when Pamela June Ray went missing, so he said, "What other lady?" Mark's reply, "The one from Panama City with the kids." Now I want to talk about someone else I met while researching my article on Pamela June Ray. It involves an incredibly kind and sympathetic person whom I encountered while researching the No Vacancy article. I was so impressed by this woman and her compassion, I thought it would make for a very thought-provoking commentary on a group of people that we either judge unfairly or don't really take the time to think about at all. That is the family of the people who kill. The person whom I'm specifically talking about is Mark Riebe's daughter, Jelena. She was only 6 when her father started his sentence for Donna Callahan's murder. She has many memories of him and also, several years into his sentence, would go with other family members to visit her father in prison. I was told by Dennis Haley, as well as Jelena, that the majority of Mark Riebe's family are mortified by the actions of their relative. They have such sympathy for the families of the women whom he is suspected of killing and have tried repeatedly over the years to get Mark Riebe to come clean about everything. Jelena, along with a few other family members, seem to have taken on the guilt that her father should be feeling, and it's so hard to put yourself in her situation. She has reached out to family members of Riebe's possible victims, not knowing what their reaction would be, and she continues to be close to Pamela June Ray's sister. Even her giving me full permission to mention her in this podcast will probably create some more tension between her and some members of her family, but for Jelena, it is completely worth it. She will do anything she can to try to find out any answers in these cases if it will help the victim's family. At this point, her response in whatever is asked of her is that she will do anything if it will help. Jelena also has some recollections about her father, some very unsettling ones, that I think need to be mentioned in this article. There was a time when she was close to her father, when she was very young, but those days are gone. Unfortunately, she has many memories of her and her mother being beaten, choked, and abused by her father when she was a child that she continues to carry with her. During the time when police were excavating the family property in hopes of finding Donna Callahan's remains, Mark Riebe decided to take his wife and children and abruptly move in the middle of the night to live with family members in Illinois. Jelena remembers the last-minute move and said that they took 2 U-Hauls with them for the trip. She rode with her father in a U-Haul that, to her recollection, contained 6 garbage cans with black bags in them. The children were expressly forbidden not to touch or go near the cans. It is unknown but very suspect why Mark Riebe would take the time to transport bags of trash with him to Illinois instead of disposing of them in Florida. Of course, the question is, what was in the bags? She then said when they got to their relative's home in a rural area in central Illinois, she and her siblings were instructed to dig holes that their father told them were to be for a garden. The children dug the holes, and Jelena remembers them being proud of the job they had done. After they finished digging, however, Mark Riebe proceeded to put some of the mysterious trash bags in the holes and covered them up. It is still unknown to this day what was in the bags. Jelena really has no relationship to speak of with her father currently. She hasn't visited him in prison for over 13 years, and when she wrote him a letter a few years ago talking about her concerns and asking him some questions, his response was very unkind and hurtful. She has no desire for a relationship with her father in the future, and at this point is focused on doing whatever she can to help the investigations and be a comfort to the loved ones of the women her father may have murdered. Now I want to talk about a few things that happened after I posted my article in 2019. Pamela June Ray's sister Rhonda Bishop got in touch with Macon County, Illinois Sheriff's Department about a dig in the area where Mark Riebe moved his family shortly after Pam disappeared. They then contacted Illinois State Police and did do a search using ground-penetrating radar for a preliminary search near Warrensburg, Illinois. As far as we know, nothing of interest was found, but I do know their funds were limited and they were only able to search a small area of a very large property. There is a possibility of searches in that area in the future, as there are 2 other areas of interest they would like to check. There is also talk of doing more searches in the Defuniak Springs, Florida area. Of course, the ultimate goal is to find these missing women and return them to their loved ones. Another interesting thing that happened after my article was published is Rhonda Bishop's correspondence with Alex Wells from prison. He has always been kind and respectful to Rhonda and was willing to comment on his half-brother for my article. Wells has exhausted all of his appeals and is now free to discuss his case and anything else he wishes. Here are some excerpts from his writings. I do want to put in context that Alex Wells is a confessed killer, so whether you believe anything in his writings or not is up to you. He did cover several different topics in his letter, so I will categorize each one before I read his comments. He first talks about his confession and plea to the Donna Callahan case. I don't know how familiar you are with my case, but the judge would only allow me to take a plea if 2 things happened. First and foremost, I had to take a polygraph test given by an FDLE agent, and failing that test was not an option. If I failed that test, I would have automatically been found guilty and would have been put back before the jury, not to determine guilt or innocence, but life or death. The second thing that had to happen was that I had to tell them where Donna Callahan was buried. At that time, all I knew was the 2 stories that Mark had told me on 2 separate occasions. As it turned out, he had actually told the truth about one of them. I passed 2 polygraph tests with no deception and passed a voice analysis stress test the following day, and was only able to tell them of the 2 different places that Mark had mentioned in the past. He then talks about Riebe's possible involvement in Pamela June Ray's disappearance. In 1992, Mark and Vicki were living in Shalimar in Okaloosa County, so I have no idea where he could have taken your sister in that area unless he returned to a familiar area in Walton County. I have a copy of the full confession he gave in your sister's disappearance, but knowing Mark as I do, it's hard to determine what is fact and what is fiction. I do know that when Mark told them that I was responsible for your sister's disappearance, Dennis Haley told me that he provided information that only someone involved would know. That's why they went after him once they found out that I was in prison in 1992. Why would he recant? I don't know, but he did the same thing in my case. 6 months before I went to trial, Mark called the newspaper, the prosecutor, my attorney, and the FDLE and told them he wanted to get this all over with. The only time Mark spoke of your sister's disappearance, to my knowledge, is when he told the FDLE that I was the one responsible for it. Up until that point, I was not even aware that she was missing. Ms. Bishop, I wish I did know where your sister was, because I'd tell you if I knew anything that I thought would help you in any way. I would tell you. After allowing Mark to destroy my life, I would have no problem helping destroy his, but I won't make something up to do it. My mother begged me to tell anything if I knew it because she wants your family to be at peace and have closure. This is in reference to some suspicious remarks that Mark made to Alex about possibly moving a body. As for your questions, I'm not sure which visit you're referring to concerning Mark, but I'm assuming you're referring to when he came to see me at Walton CI just after the FDLE had me placed in confinement under investigation for the Donna Callahan case. That was the last time I saw him. The only thing out of the ordinary conversation that occurred that day was his comment that they, the FDLE, would never find a body. The way it was stated was as if he had moved it to a place only he knew about, which didn't make sense later because when they found Donna Callahan's body, they could tell that it was an original burial site and had not been tampered with. Debbie said on that same day that Mark came to visit me, he went to her house and was really dirty and sweaty and asked her if he could use her shower to clean up. He told her he was helping someone work on a transmission, but she claimed it was dirt, not oil or transmission fluid, all over him. In one of his statements he gave to Dennis Haley at a later date, he claimed to have followed me in the woods and watched me dig up bodies and move them, and he went as far as telling Dennis that it was Donna and your sister. When they found Donna and learned that I was in prison when your sister disappeared, Dennis later told me that Mark was actually telling him of things that he had done, but was telling them he had seen me doing them. On Mark's possible involvement in the Rhonda Taylor murder. I've spoken with the FDLE and homicide detectives at length about Rhonda Taylor's case, because I believe that the night it happened is the same night Mark called me from a bar pool hall and asked me to come get him because he had been in a fight and stabbed someone. The bar I picked him up at that night is about 100 yards from the nursing home. I do know by reading some of the investigative reports that Vicky worked that night at the nursing home and their babysitter kept the kids that night. They could never prove that it was actually the same night. They went through all the phone records trying to see if it was in fact the same night, but they never connected them. I was actually in a court-ordered alcohol rehab with Rhonda Taylor several years before this happened. On his own possible involvement in Deborah Poe's disappearance. I've spoken several times with investigators concerning the Deborah Poe case, and I'll tell you the same thing I've told them. Not only was I on house arrest in Walton County, where my every move was monitored by probation and parole, tax records and business records will show that I've never been employed in Orange County, even though my picture was picked in a photo pack that is designed to get certain people picked. The investigators knew it was impossible for me to have been in Orlando during that time. They came here several months ago and told me this themselves, but said they had to follow up on it anyway. I'm serving 2 natural life sentences, and if there was anything at all that I was involved in that was still unsolved or still being investigated, I would have no problem owning up to them. I will die in prison either way, so what difference would it make? I have not spoken to or heard from Mark since he came to see me in 1993, not long after the Donna Callahan investigation started, and personally have no desire to hear from him. To answer your question of whether or not Mark was capable of committing the things he's confessed to, after witnessing what I did on August 6, 1989, yes, I'd say he is. Do I believe he actually committed all of the ones he confessed to? No, I don't. But I do believe he did the majority of them, especially the ones in this area. I've seen him in action. I know he's very capable. Our next guest on this podcast, I believe, will add a very interesting element to the subject we're talking about. I first met her a few months ago when she was actually doing research on the possible victims of Mark Riebe. Rhonda Bishop had told her about my articles, and she contacted me. We have become fast friends, and I wanted to have her on here to talk about her upcoming project, which I think you listeners will find very interesting. Her name is Tracy Hohenstein. Welcome, Tracy, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
First off, I want you to tell our listeners what you do for a living or what you are most known for.
Well, I'm a published author, and I'm most known for my fictional series, which is called The Rachel Scott Adventures. It's a 4-book series that focuses on missing people. My first book was about a Florida teen who goes missing during a spring break cruise. And at the time of the writing, I don't know if you remember Natalie Holloway, she was still missing in Aruba. And so I think it shows in some of my writing certain elements of real life cases that find their way into my fictional books. So that's what I'm most known for.
Very interesting. So I will reveal that you are planning to write a book, and it's not on Mark Riebe, but it's more about many of the women who are thought to be his victims.
Yes, that is true. A lot of people know this yet, because I've been keeping it under wraps, but I can say that, yeah, I am writing my first true crime book. I really wanted to give these women a voice and tell their stories. So I'm focusing on mainly 8 of the women that are believed to have been murdered by Mark Riebe, and possibly by him having an accomplice or accomplices.
That sounds great. So the reason you are doing it is to give a voice to his victims.
Yes, that's what I wanted to mostly focus on, is the women, because there's not a lot of other than your blog and podcast, a couple of episodes on unsolved mysteries and other places, but there's really not a lot of media that is covered these cold cases that are in my area.
That's true. Now, as I mentioned, we have become friends during this process, so I have been sort of an insider on everything that you've been doing to research for the book. To say you have been taken down a rabbit hole is perhaps an understatement. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, the funny thing about writing true crime is that you do more research than you actually do writing. And you spend more time going down rabbit holes. So, for instance, I've spent an entire day just chasing down one lead, looking through like online yearbooks and high school alumni groups on Facebook just to find the victim's best friend. And I've spent hours scouring Google Earth for possible dig sites for missing people. So it's really easy to get caught up on the research, and I have to remind myself to set time aside to actually write the damn book.
Yeah. People don't understand how time-consuming the research part is of this.
It is actually very time-consuming. I was actually researching for another spinoff series from our Rachel Scott books, and I was wondering if there were any missing people cases in my area. I live in the northern panhandle of Florida, and we're very well known for our beautiful beaches, and I really didn't think I'd find anything. And I was shocked when I found over a dozen missing person cases or unsolved homicides in the panhandle. Some of them were even 20 minutes from where I lived, and most of the cases from like 1970 to around 1990. So I immediately thought, hey, we might have a serial killer on our hands. And that's when I decided to dive into writing about these cases instead.
Wow. So you may have already answered this, but what is the thing that has surprised you the most during your research thus far?
Oh wow, many things. One thing that comes to mind is actually finding your blog site, Lost and Found. When I first started researching for my spinoff series, it was finding your blog that actually gave me an aha moment. I was
Wow.
like, you know what? Somebody else gets it. I need to find out
Wow.
who this other person is. I said, we do have a serial killer in our midst, and another person thinks the same way I do. And I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that not many people had already put two and two together. And another thing that surprised me is how much stuff you find online. When we were looking for that babysitter that Mark Riebe
Mm-hmm.
used, I thought it'd take me hours or days to find this guy. I don't know
Yeah.
if you remember that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
I was like, it took us less than 5 minutes to
Yeah.
find him on Facebook.
Facebook's
And
great. Yeah.
it is so good. It's
Mhm.
awesome, but it's also kind of scary how much
Yeah.
of our life are lived online, mostly Facebook. But seriously, that's how we found most of the people to talk to, is just looking them up on Facebook.
Yeah. People want to know how you found them, and it's really not hard at all.
It's not, and then like I said, it is a little scary, but
Yeah.
just doing a little bit of detective work online, and it's surprising the stuff that you can come up with. But I've also learned to verify, not take,
Yeah. Exactly.
not take it at its worth. You always have to make sure you verify your sources.
Yeah. And original newspaper articles are always better than what you read on the internet.
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
agree.
I will say from my own experience, just researching one case at a time can be quite consuming, but you are researching several cases pretty much simultaneously. How are you able to do all of this?
That's a good question, Heather. Sometimes I literally feel like I'm juggling all of it. When it started to become overwhelming, I actually hired this. I call him my assistant. Actually, it's my son who's
Oh,
taking a sabbatical from college right now. He really got me organized. I have a notebook. I'm a notebook, paper and pen kind of person. But we
mhm.
have a notebook for each victim, so I can keep all my interview
Oh,
files
wow.
and transcripts. I also have a developmental editor that I've worked with for years. She's actually a good friend of mine, and she helps me keep organized, reminds me I need to write, quit doing so much research, and she also edits my chapters as I write them. So, and you
Yeah.
and I almost talk every day, it
Yeah.
seems like, and we're always bouncing ideas around and sharing information. So, without all of your help, I really don't think I'd be able to do it by myself. It really takes a team.
Oh, I appreciate that. So, what else would you like to say about the book? I understand that it's still in the research phase and that will take some time, but do you have any sort of time frame of when it could be released?
I don't have a set release date yet. My deadline is to actually complete the book by next spring.
Hmm.
My hope is the book will be out by next fall, but it really depends on a lot of things right now that I'm not sure about. But I am on social media. I have an author page on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You can basically find me anywhere.
Yeah.
And I post regular updates. And then all of my books can also be found on Amazon. But I'm really hoping to get it out sometime next year. And, we're still researching a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah.
So it could be that it might be a two-part series. I might do two books. It just really depends on the outcome of some things we got going on right now.
Well, we know it'll be very in depth and very well researched for sure.
Thank you.
Is Do you have any other comments or observations about Mark Riebe? I do know that you've exchanged a few emails with him as part of your research, and he's always anxious to reply to anyone, I will say.
Yes, he is. As you know, I did reach out to Mark Riebe. I think we exchanged 3 emails, and I did this when I first started researching my book. Unfortunately, he hasn't really told me anything new or anything that you and I didn't already know. He claims, of course, to be innocent. He's recanted all of his confessions. And quite honestly, he's pointed the finger at his half brother, Alex Wells, who, if I'm sure your listeners know, is incarcerated as well for the murder of Donna Callahan in
Mhm.
1989. And he's also pointed his finger at his stepson, Jason. He pointed the finger at him in Andrea Durham's case and said
Interesting.
that Jason was the last person to see her. Now, that has not been verified. We're still kind of looking into that. But honestly, Heather, I don't think we'll ever get the truth from Mark.
Yeah.
It's,
He's just a poor innocent victim, in his words.
yeah, exactly. And but I did want to just see what he had to say. I doubt I'll put any of it in my book because, again, it's nothing that we didn't already know, but I did want to just, you never know, just see what he would say, give him the opportunity to come clean, and that didn't happen.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want the listeners to know about this project?
I will say, too, before I go into that, just thinking about Mark, one thing I just thought of is I think from what I found with my research that he is possibly guilty in a few of the cold cases. I think there was too much evidence and things that he knew that he confessed to that no one would have known. And now the real question in my mind is who else is involved, because I don't think he did these crimes himself. And then going into the question you just asked me, we are doing a few searches. I can't say much about it right now because it's stuff that we have in the works, but there are two women, and Pamela June Ray and Andrea Durham. Those are the two women that have never been found that they attribute to Mark, and we've narrowed down a couple places to search. So that's kind of exciting. I really hope that we are able to find them and bring some closure to the family. And I still have a few interviews with investigators and family members and friends to talk to. Like I said, we're probably just really getting started with all of the research, but I feel pretty confident that we'll find something, especially when it comes to these two women and finding out what happened to them.
Tracy, as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I wish you the best in the book. And of course, I will do whatever I can do to help in the research. I can't wait to read your book when it's out. Take care, Tracy, and we'll, of course, be in touch.
Okay. Thanks so much, Heather.
It is now time for my thoughts on all of this. I do believe that Mark Riebe is a serial killer. He admitted to participating in Donna Callahan's murder, and the specific details he had in several others absolutely convinced me of his guilt. His confessions and then recanting them is so cruel and heartless for the pain he continues to put these families through. I can't help but wonder if there were even more murders than he mentioned. Perhaps the stories and confessions Mark Riebe didn't tell investigators may be the most terrifying part of all. If his confessions are all true, then Mark Riebe could be one of the worst serial killers in Florida history. When I asked Special Agent Dennis Haley to sum up his opinion on Mark Riebe, this is what he said. Mark Riebe is a manipulative con man who wants you to feel he's the victim. He's very deceptive and even charming at times, evil and cold-hearted. I wanted to wrap up this podcast by actually quoting something Mark Riebe wrote in a recent letter to Pamela June Ray's sister Rhonda. It goes, "Justice. First you must have the truth, for without the truth there can never be justice. They go hand in hand, or at least they should." If investigators' theories are correct, those words may just come back to haunt Mark Riebe someday. Perhaps only then the true justice for his possible victims and their families can finally be served. That concludes our podcast on Mark Riebe. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. You can also reach me at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo.com. I hope to have a new episode posted every 2 weeks, and as always, you can find all of my articles as well as links to my most recent podcast episodes on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.